Got some breaking news out of Winder, Georgia. The father of the teenager convicted in the deadly Apalachee High School shooting that we carried live right here on CBS News 24/7 just got the sentence. In March, a jury found Colin Gray guilty of providing his son Colt the gun that Colt is alleged to have used in that mass shooting, despite warning signs about his son's declining mental health. Let's listen in from court just a moment ago.
All of your crimes are a form of criminal negligence. None of them require mandatory prison. I don't have a concern that you're going to commit future crimes. You're 55 years old and you have no criminal history. You didn't intend to commit these crimes that you've been convicted of. But the loss here is profound. But I still have to distinguish your acts from the malignant heart in the acts that Colt Gray committed upon the Apalachee School. For each of the murders in the second degree, I'm sentencing you to 15 years in confinement concurrent with one another. For each of the involuntary manslaughters, I'm sentencing you to 10 years confinement concurrent. For each non-merging cruelty to children, I'm sentencing you to 10 years in confinement concurrent. For each non-merging reckless conduct charge, I'm sentencing you to 12 months confinement concurrent. This is an aggregate sentence of 15 years in prison. I'm going to have the sentence filed presently. I want to advise you, I'm required to advise you that you have certain post-conviction appellate rights. You have the right to a court-appointed attorney if you need one, to file a direct appeal or a motion for new trial. Those have to be filed within 30 days of today's date. You have a right to file a petition for habeas corpus to challenge any violation of your constitutional rights or any legal errors. That has to be filed within 4 years of today's date. You have no right to a court-appointed attorney for a habeas corpus petition, as it's a civil proceeding. I'll ask defense counsel to file a placeholder motion for you. If you need court-appointed counsel, make sure you apply so that you can comply with those 30-day deadlines. If your motion for new trial is denied, you have a right to a court-appointed counsel and can file an appeal from that within 30 days of that denial. This only closes the legal chapter of this horror. The pain, the heartache, they continue. I understand that. I hope all of you know that this community loves you, and I ask that God gives you peace. Thank you. We're adjourned.
And with that, the father of an accused mass shooter learns, as he stands up in court, shackled and taken away by a sheriff's deputy, he will spend 15 years in prison. If I understood him correctly, that judge, he's 55 now, he will be able to get out when he's 70. In that courtroom, live now to correspondent Skyler Henry. He's now outside the courtroom. So Skyler, walk us through what happened in court today. It sounded like the judge has some compassion for that dad, but had to err on the side of what is written in the law books.
Yeah, that's right, Reed. And the fact that this simply is unprecedented. Certainly the first time any judge in any capacity has had to deal with something like this in this state, only having reference to a few other cases all across the country. In fact, it came up earlier today in the Crumbly case, the Crumbly incident where Ethan Crumbly opened fire on students inside of Oxford High School several years ago in Michigan. His parents ended up serving and are still serving 10 to 15-year prison sentences. And so I think with that being the guide and with that sort of pressure, so to speak, I think that is sort of the fine line that the judge had to walk with in this case. Though we should point out that it was 16-year-old Colt Gray who committed these crimes, was found guilty of those crimes, pled guilty to those crimes, and will spend the rest of his days behind bars without the opportunity of parole. And so I think this is certainly interesting from a legal perspective. Definitely interesting when you listen to some of those victim impact statements that we heard from earlier today, including the parents and loved ones of those who were killed, all of whom talking about the horrors and tragedies and struggles that they've had to live with in the days and months and years following what happened back in September of 2024. Everything from post-traumatic stress to quite literally physical therapy, recovering from some of those wounds. And then, of course, you have those who have been suffering with the loss of their respective loved ones. I'm thinking of Mason Skirmahorn, his mother, who we've grown a great relationship with and had the pleasure of speaking with several times, who's talked about what challenges she's had to deal with losing her son. I'm thinking of Coach Ricky Aspinwall, who we had the pleasure of hanging out with his team at Apalachee High School, some of the players remembering him fondly while also talking about the challenges that they're dealing with, not only on the field, but in the classroom and in their everyday lives, not having that coach and mentor there. I'm thinking of Christina Irami, a math teacher who everyone loved inside of Apalachee High School. And then, of course, Christian Angulo, who was incredibly brave, shot in the chest, but still managed to close the door to prevent some of his other classmates from being shot at the time of the shooting. So when you take all that into consideration, this is a community that is suffering and will be recovering for quite a long time. Everywhere you go around here, you see Apalachee Strong on cars, on bumper stickers, on buildings, everywhere. Because yes, this community may not be that large, but it is a community that is filled with pride. And a lot of people remembered what happened that day. Yes, this is a close to a chapter in a very tragic book, but obviously, as you heard the judge say, still a lot more that they'll have to deal with emotionally moving forward.
Well, there's a reason you and I are friends, because we share a value, and that is on days like this, typical news coverage tends to focus on the people accused, the people meeting their accountability moment, but you so artfully and so appropriately named every one of those victims and gave them their humanity. And that tees me up, I guess, to my next question. Is there conversation in that community that they are aware? You know, you called it unprecedented, but now with that judge's sentencing, there is precedent set. Is there community conversation saying that this will now be repeated in community after community if the situation is like this one?
Well, there's certainly a bar now. And I think that, God forbid, something like this happening again, not only in this state, but elsewhere, there's certainly precedent that has now being built to say that, yeah, you may not be the one who opened fire, but you are responsible as it relates to parents. And it is up to you to make sure you know what's happening with your children, no matter how online they may be, no matter how sort of sequestered they may be from everyday society. It is up to you as a parent to know what is happening in your children's lives, both online, obviously socially, and at school. And if you recognize that there is something wrong, that it is your responsibility to do something about it immediately. Not wait until it's too late. Not wait until it's convenient for you, but to simply say, hey, we need to do something about this before this gets much worse.
Right. And what's the conversations about guns? Because this all comes down to that gun and how that gun ended up in the hands of that young person who the judge said, what was the word he used for his heart? You know, a diminished capacity within his own heart to achieve some sort of violence like this.
Right. You know, I think that that's a interesting conversation that I think a lot of people, especially if they're unfamiliar with communities that exist outside of metropolitan areas, try to figure out sort of the gun culture, so to speak. You got to remember that a lot of these places, guns are typical. A lot of people have them in their houses. A lot of people have them in their, possession and cars and things like that. And that is normal. The thing that isn't normal is for a lot of those weapons to be unsecured, unlocked, and certainly accessible for people under the age of 21, under the age of 18, and accessible for people who have clearly shown signs of mental anguish and mental deterioration over the course of the past several months. And I think that is what we heard the judge, that's what we heard the state, and that's what we heard from many of those victim impact statements as well, saying that it was up to him, up to Colin Gray, to do something about that, recognizing that something wasn't right with his child, to say, hey, maybe, yes, guns are a part of our family, they're a part of our lives, but maybe it was time to either put them away, lock them away, get them out of the house so that something like what we saw in September 2024 doesn't happen.
May we never forget. Skyler Henry, thank you so much today for your reporting.